All right. You read the paper, right? So you know all the sections. What are the sections of a formal report? What are the sections of a formal report? Abstract, introduction. Well, you probably don't remember it, but we'll cover it. The abstract. What is the abstract? Tell me what the abstract is. A summary, but it has to have the final result. You know, the summary is going to be like a spoiler alert type deal, where you're going to tell the person what you found. And the reason for this is because most people don't have enough time to read the full paper. What most people will do is they'll just read the abstract and then want to extract the most important information from that. It should be one paragraph in length, your abstract. And so, anywhere from a sentence to multiple sentences, but let's take a look at this abstract here. Determining the composition ratio of substances that contribute to one's work is crucial to understanding the fundamentals of what to expect, reaction speed, and if there will even be an outcome. I don't really know what that means, but it's all right. The research purpose of conclusively finding the percent composition of sulfate in the unknown develops skills correlating to gravimetric analysis, such as weighing, quantitatively transferring, washing, and drying a solid. Using stoichiometric calculations, simple statistical analysis of results, along with the combination listed above, we are able to determine the mass percent of sulfate ion in the unknown mixture. Okay, we're here. A brief synopsis of the executed experimental plan is to dry 3 samples of the same content in a desiccator, dissolve the samples in dilute HCl, then boil the concoction, and then test for complete precipitation by adding BaCl2. Afterwards, the precipitate is decanted, washed through a vacuum filtration apparatus. Finally, dry the samples, cool, and weigh the final product. After this laborious process, the 3 processed compositions are calculated, summarizing, concluded with the unknown number 137, containing 65.72 plus or minus 0.58% sulfate. And so basically, this experiment, you just determined the sulfate in unknown sample, and you came out with 65.72. You tested 3 samples, right, by dissolving and precipitating out with barium chloride and isolating that precipitate. So, that's okay. You could add your own writing style to it. It doesn't have to sound like everybody else's. So this one was unique, and that's good. Let's read another one. Abstract: to develop skills in weighing, washing, drying, and quantitatively transferring a solid by using balanced equations and using statistical analysis of results. We use gravimetric analysis to determine the mass percent of sulfate ion given an unknown mixture. This experiment was done by weighing out 3 different portions of the unknown mixture. One thing would be nice in the abstract is, what did the unknown mixture look like? Do you have any clue? Actually, I don't have permission to, so I can't give you photos of this because I don't have permission, but I'll post this. And so you could take it, but I can't allow. You could just take it off the screen. Shot. But when you have something like this as an example, then I expect something different. Just don't copy what other people have done. We warmed up the solution and added excess amount of barium chloride solution so that the sulfate ions would precipitate as solid barium sulfate. Then we warmed up the solution until the barium sulfate was solidified. After we filtered off the barium sulfate and the solution and dried it in the oven to remove any water left in the barium sulfate, then we got a final reading using the analytical balance and calculate our average percentage, 64.2 plus. You don't have to have the percent here. You could just say 64.2 plus minus, and then add this in. Okay, sig figs is a problem here, but there's other problems. Neither of these 2 abstracts are perfect. They could hit some of the more key, some of the key points in this process are missing. But a lot of extra sentences are added, which could be easily, some of those sentences could easily be eliminated and then add something more crucial. you know. Let's take a look at another one here. This one's a little shorter. Abstract. The purpose of this lab experiment was to determine the mass percent of sulfate ion in an unknown mixture. The unknown mixture was given to us was number 136, which was a white powdery solid. The experiment was performed by putting the 3 weighed portions of the unknown in a very dilute hydrochloric acid solution. Then barium chloride solution was added to precipitate all the sulfate ions as barium sulfate. The barium sulfate was then filtered and dried. The mass percent of sulfate was calculated from the mass of the dried barium sulfate. The average mass percent of sulfate in the unknown mixture was found to be 63.4. Get rid of this percent, plus or minus 5.72%. Okay, so this is good too. This pretty much hits it. You could add more, or but this is about as slim as you want to go. Here's another example of an abstract. Average 46.0 grams by mass of sulfate was determined from 3 unknown mixture using gravimetric analysis such as weighing, quantitatively transferring, washing, and drying solids. This must be on Wikipedia or something because everybody and when I see something like this repeated, I check it sometimes and I look, are you just copying and pasting it off the web? If so, you better show it as being copied and pasted by putting quotation marks around it or formatting it a little differently to show that these aren't your words, they're somebody else's words. And that's okay, you can copy and paste stuff, but you just have to be clear, what the source of that is.
Is this like APA format?
The AP, no, this is a scientific paper format that I sent out. The scientific paper handout. As far as the references and citations go, any format's okay. There's a whole chapter on scientific citations, but I didn't include that. So, whatever you want to use, AMA, whatever format you want to use for that is fine. What do you think about this abstract?
Abstract is spelled wrong.
This abstract,
It's also spelled wrong.
yeah, obviously this person wrote the paper maybe the night before.
Looks like it.
It looks like it, and basically this was an F paper. Even though
Pretty abstract.
this was an F. This was an absolute fail. Even though it was 2 pages, 1.5 pages long.
How long is it? How many pages?
Okay, after the abstract comes the introduction. And so we'll just start off with this introduction, which wasn't bad. Sulfate ion is a polyatomic anion with empirical formula. Okay, so talk about some sulfate, molecular mass. It consists of central sulfur surrounded by 4 equivalent oxygen atoms in tetrahedral arrangement. The sulfur atom is in +6 oxidation state, while the 4 oxygen atoms are each in the -2 state. Its conjugate base is bisulfate. It comprises polar covalent bonds and ionic bonds. It has double bond and single bond. That makes it to have 6 resonances. We were talking about sulfate, the structure earlier. Because of its chemical bond arrangement, it is very radical crystalline compound and very soluble with some exceptions. This radical crystalline, I have no idea what that is. It's very reactive, and this is hydrolyzed, supposed to be, and this makes it to have highly chemical significance in our environment. So actually this is kind of interesting. An introduction should be kind of interesting. What an introduction does is it gives you a historical perspective on things, either gravimetric analysis or sulfate. Why do people care about sulfate? Is it an important industrial chemical or what? Well, they go on. Sulfates are historically important compounds in both biological and chemical industries. Were known to alchemists, and so far, wow, this abstract. I mean, the abstract was bad, but this intro is sounding interesting. It's kind of makes the reader want to understand more. The virile salts, although was this plagiarized? This wasn't probably, but you got to start to wonder sometimes. We're so called. The virile salts, glassy, were so called because they were some of the first transparent crystals known. Green vitriol, blue vitriol, white vitriol, alum, figured, etc. And so they're just going through this. You know, algicide, animals and plants, therapeutic baths, soaps. Earth, albedo. You know, if I start reading a lot of this stuff, you know, what's the source on this? You know? I want to know where this information came from, and there's no source reference for this. It should be cited, you know, whether it's Wikipedia or wherever else you get the information. You need to cite it somehow in here to let me know where all this information comes from. So, for example, if I look for, you know, radical crystalline compound, I could find that, you know, because I don't know what that is exactly. And so there are no sources here. But quite a lot. That was you know, the bulk of this paper was the introduction. And then they have the experimental section. And then the most important part is after the experimental section. I tell everybody the most important stuff is there. So spend all your time there. But they ran out of time, so they didn't finish the paper. So this was about a quarter of the way through. Okay, the intros don't always have to be long, you know, they can be short. This one was quite a bit shorter. Rather than talking about sulfate initially, this person talked about gravimetric analysis. You know, it was used in chemistry. So a paragraph about gravimetric analysis and then a paragraph about sulfate. Some of its uses here. This person had a single paragraph, intro, you know, about sulfate, gravimetric analysis, and our unknown. You know, this is how we determine the percent mass of our sulfate in our unknown sample. And so some kind of connection with our experiment here. I also, you know, we need some kind of reference. This must be the reference here, gravimetric analysis, because they're saying Theodore W. Richards. And this is good, you know, they put it in quotation marks, so I see that, okay, this must be taken from gravimetric analysis. And so I'd look at the back and see, okay, what's the source for gravimetric analysis? And here we have it, works cited. And so whatever format you want to use for citations is fine. Okay, let me see something. No. So here's another one talking about gravimetric analysis. This is a good citation here, Haller, you know, about the that. And then two means of gravimetric analysis. And then the performed experiment. You know, our report should be all in past tense. Right. The performed experiment, because we did this experiment, determining sulfate from a sample used. This is the precipitation method. And it goes on. Okay, so those are some ideas for introduction. You could talk about the technique, or sulfate, or both. You know, technique and sulfate. You can talk some about history. You know, technique, etc. I hate lists. The reason I hate lists is because lists aren't allowed in papers. If you write a paper, you know how many extra trees they have to cut? You know, because they print so many, you know, thousands and thousands of pages of this. You know, that all journals forbid something like this because it's such a huge waste of space. A lot of journals will limit you to the number of words. You know, they don't want more than 1,000 or 5,000 words or something, and so you have to edit it down, edit it down, edit it down until you can meet their minimum, or maximum, excuse me. And so equipment list is wrong. And so this. What we want to see is we want to see the experimental section, which tells us what you did exactly. And this is all in past tense here. You know, approximately. This is the nuts and bolts of this. This is the cookbook. The cookbook is you just tell somebody mix this with that, but you don't tell them what's happening. You know, you don't try to get them to understand. Just take 50 mils of this and mix it with that, or get 5 grams of this and 6 grams of that. You know? And so this is the nuts and bolts with no analysis. And so they talk. This person talked about the drying oven and the desiccator, and then got the samples here. Okay, there's no analysis in this. It's just, you know, what you mix together and what you do here, so that somebody could repeat the experiment in exactly the same way you did it. So they said once precipitation was complete, the beakers were covered and additional processing occurred. And they got the masses here after weighing and cooling. And so,
Do we have pictures in this one?
you could have pictures in this painting. So here's another experimental section here. This lab was completed over 3 days. On the first day, they did this. On the second day, they did that. And the third day, they did something else. So it's just going through what they did, but they aren't talking about, you know, what's really happening there. Take a look at this experimental section. Compare it to the last one. What's different? Well, one, no calculation. What else? Read a little bit of it. Read the second sentence. First you will. You know, first you will, is that past tense? No. When you read something like this, did they actually do any work? Can you tell by reading this? When I read this, I don't know if they did it or, you know, they're just telling somebody what to do. You know, this is not good. The experimental section has to be a description of what you actually did in lab, not what you're supposed to do. And so everything has to be in past tense in this report.
Also, are you not supposed to use the word you?
You could use you, you could use we, you could use I. It's okay. The practice is to minimize the usage of the... Okay, next, after the experimental section comes what? Okay, the results section. Sometimes the results section and the discussion section are combined. Let's see this semester, did I combine them or did I keep them separate? I combined, no, I kept them separate. I kept them separate, which means this. The results are just the numbers here. Here you could have a table. Tables are okay. Lists like that aren't. So a table like this is fine. Except this person mixed up results. You know what results are? Results are experimental facts. Results never change because those are the facts of the experiment. And so I had to fix this person because, you know, this person is saying that the massive crucible and the precipitate is barium sulfate, they're saying, but how can they be sure? You know, it's a fact that they got a crucible and they had precipitate in it and they weighed it. That's a fact. But it's not a fact that that precipitate in there is 100% barium sulfate, is it? That has to be argued that it is 100% barium sulfate. How can you prove to me that that white PPT in there is? Can you? Yes, you can, and that's your job, right? That's why we've been talking about this stuff all along. How do we know? Are we sending this out for elemental analysis? Did you send out your barium sulfate for chemical analysis? And they came back and said, yep, that's 100% barium sulfate?
No.
No. And so we have to use our analysis of the whole procedure to argue that that precipitate is what we are saying it is. For scientists, they aren't going to believe you if you just say, okay, this is this. They want to see some proof, right? And so in the results, you don't say anything. You just state the facts. These calculations don't belong in here because this is assuming that it is barium sulfate, right? And so this is what we call discussion. You know, is it experimental fact that it's 65.42% sulfate in there? Is that experimental fact? No. Is it fact that your crucible with precipitate weighed 19.0637 grams? Yes, that is a fact, right? And so what happens in science is this. What happens in science is somebody goes along and they start reading somebody else's paper, and then they look at the results, and they think about the results, and they come up with their own conclusion. And then they read the analysis of the author and the conclusion that the author has generated from that analysis, and they go, I don't agree. And so in science, what you see is papers that are titled Reinterpretation of So-and-so's Data, or Reinterpretation of So-and-so's Paper. In other words, you know, we don't believe you. We don't believe you got it right. We're redoing your data with our analysis. Does that make sense? And so the thing is, this is why the results are kept away from the discussion, because the discussion might change. The discussion might change, you know, with advances in theory, with advances in instrumentation, with other advances, you know, the interpretation of that data could change over time. But the actual data itself is fact. And so what we do with raw data like this is we always write raw data in ink. Analysis always in pencil is fine for analysis because you can always come up with a new analysis anytime or erase that analysis and reinterpret the data yourself. Okay. And so the results section is very short. The longest section is the analysis, and the analysis we don't call analysis. Do you know what the analysis section is called? Discussion. These calculations don't belong in the results. These calculations belong in discussion. These calculations belong in results. This calculation, this minus this equals that, the mass of the precipitate. That's fact. That's not a big deal. But this type of calculation, the percent sulfate, no. And so the discussion, you're going to go through the whole experiment kind of step by step like we did, and look at all the details. So let's take a look at this. The discussion section, which is your analysis, should be the longest. So let's take a look at how many pages this person's discussion section came out to. And so that's 1 page, single spaced, with narrow margins. 2 pages, single spaced. 3 pages. Calculations take room. 4 pages. A little over 4 pages of discussion. That's, you know, that's what I expect. You know, I expect something like that. You know, 3, 4 pages. This person got an A. This was an A paper. This person hit all the details. You know, and made a convincing argument that this was a sound method of analysis. Right? Thought of all the potential questions a reviewer might ask or a reader might ask, right? And went through it and talked about those. And so this is pretty good, although, you know, not perfect. Like, for example, you know, they screwed up the tense. You know, it's always what? Past tense. They made some errors. You know, you know, if you give a thorough analysis, then I don't weigh certain errors as heavily. You know, if they made a mistake here, a mistake there, it's okay. Here, you know, this should have been longer because they didn't have any chemical equations in this. Take a look. You know, even though this was an A paper, it's still weak because there are no. Do you see one chemical equation in there? You know, that was a major error for them. But since the rest of the paper was so strong, I didn't weigh it like I normally would weigh it. You know, if it was a weak discussion and they didn't have any chemical equations, then I would have hit them with some deductions for that. So this person has equations, but you know, the equations, I don't like it when they're inside the paragraph like this. You know, here equations you can list them for clarity. You know, but all their equations were inside and it made it hard to read. But, you know, that's something I could overlook. I mean, this was another 4, how many pages was this discussion? This is like a 5-page discussion in this paper here. So what are you going to say in the discussion? Well, you know, a lot of this is 1 page of calculations, you know, so you think, 1 page of calculations, that means only 3 or 4 pages of writing, you know? Okay, so they showed the this is good. I want to see this, you know? For example, calculating the standard deviation. I want to see that step by step. And not only do I want to see it here, I want you to talk about it here. You know, not just the equation, but the equation with some verbal explanation. Then they calculated lambda 95, but they screwed up the equation. They screwed up the equation, but I still gave them an A on this paper. You know, botched, but it's all right. Yeah. But again, it depends on the strength. So this is how these are graded in that sense. All right. Now, in a paper like this, there is no conclusion because it's a short. This is what's called a short paper. You know, short papers are less than 20 pages or so. In a long paper, you would have a formal conclusion section. In a short paper, you wouldn't because it's too short to write a conclusion. And so normally what people do is the discussion is your conclusion, and the final paragraph is how these short papers are concluded and long papers are concluded. They look into the future, you know, if you had different resources or what else could you do, you know, to make this an even stronger analysis. Okay. And that being the case, you know, there's potential for bonus points here too. And so this person caught some of the things that were mentioned earlier about what could make this analysis stronger and incorporated those into this. And so once you start writing this part at the discussion, actually you want to do it in this order. When you write this paper, you want to do all of your calculations first. Okay, then you want to start with the discussion section. And this discussion section is going to be a highly detailed, you know, kind of step-by-step walkthrough of the whole experiment, including equations, including what's happening. You know, for example, you know, how did you test for completeness of precipitation? How did you dry the samples? How were they weighed? Those types of things. Okay, then after the discussion is done, then you're over the hump. You know, it's downhill from there. The rest is easy. You know? And so what you should focus on is the discussion. This discussion is going to carry the most weight for your grade on this paper. Okay, well, we're out of time. That's it for today.
Are you doing this with the partner or